Hi guys, and welcome back to another reading vlog. Today I'm starting The Lantern Man by David Morabito. I'm genuinely feeling excited because this book revolves around mysterious lights in the English marshes and a boy whose life seems strangely connected to lanterns from childhood. From what I already know, this is not exactly horror. It is more like folklore meets historical fiction with a coming of age story woven through it. So let's see whether this mysterious lantern man is real or simply another old legend. Let's begin. Okay, so I'm done with about 15% of the book, and here are my first impressions. Right away, I'm noticing that this book has a very old-fashioned storytelling style. It almost feels like someone sitting beside a fireplace telling you the story of Frank Nightlife's entire life, rather than dropping us straight into action. And if I'm being honest, I do not mind it. The book begins with Frank as a child, and I have to say, I instantly liked him. He's curious, adventurous. He's actually exactly the sort of child who would hear someone say, "Don't go inside that cave," and immediately respond, "Interesting, tell me more about the cave." Which, honestly, same. And then we have Roger. I really like that he's a doctor because he immediately represents logic and science in the story. Whenever authors introduce a rational character this early in a story full of folklore, I start paying attention because sooner or later, logic and superstition are going to collide. Now, coming to the Ireland chapter. I loved this chapter because there's something about Ireland in literature that automatically makes everything feel 10 times more magical. Maybe it's all the mythology, or maybe it's the landscapes. Maybe it's just that every Irish novel somehow convinces me there are ancient spirits hiding behind every hill. The caves in this chapter especially caught my attention because caves in literature are never just caves. They are thresholds. They are places where people change. They are places where old secrets survive. They are places where history refuses to stay buried. And then we get the little details. The strange clock, old stories, whispers about druids, tiny mysteries that don't seem important yet. And I absolutely love books that do this because the author isn't saying, "Look, here is the big plot twist." Instead, he is slowly planting little seeds. And I'm sitting here making mental notes like some conspiracy theorist with red strings on a corkboard. So far, all the chapters give me another object to put on my imaginary evidence board: lantern, clock, caves, Ireland, folklore, druids. None of these feel random. So I'm really excited. Then we finally move into England, and immediately the atmosphere changes. This is where the book started feeling exactly like I had imagined. The marshes, the fens, the quiet little village. Honestly, the setting deserves its own character credit. It feels alive. And then the children begin talking about the Lantern Man. There it is, finally. I absolutely love stories built around local folklore because every culture has them. Growing up in India, we had stories about ghosts on lonely roads, spirits in old trees, don't whistle at night, don't answer someone calling your name after dark. There were so many things. And every country has these stories, and England's marshes have the Lantern Man. What makes it even better is that nobody completely agrees on what the Lantern Man actually is. Is he real? Is he a ghost? Is he just swamp gas? Is he a murderer? Or is everyone simply terrifying the kids into staying away from dangerous marshes? I genuinely don't know yet, and I hope the book keeps me guessing. Oh, before I forget, we also meet Beth, and thank goodness because she's not written like one of those female characters who only exist to admire the protagonist. She has curiosity, she's asking questions, she wants to investigate, and that's already making their dynamic much more interesting. I also have this tiny suspicion that Beth is going to become far more important than she currently appears. You know, when a character enters the story and your reader instincts immediately go, yeah, you're not temporary. That's Beth. And when it comes to Frank, what I'm really enjoying most is he still has this childlike confidence. He believes he can solve everything, explore everything, understand everything. He hasn't yet learned that curiosity sometimes has consequences. And in stories involving folklore, that's usually dangerous. Overall, so far, it's not horror, it's not even really mystery, also, but it's atmosphere. The real tension comes from not knowing what to believe. Every page keeps asking, do you believe the stories or do you believe science? And honestly, I don't know yet. And I'm really excited to find out. So I'm gonna go back and dive right into the Lantern Man. I think one thing that's becoming very obvious is that this isn't a plot driven novel. It's a curiosity driven novel. You're constantly reading because you want answers, not because the author is throwing cliffhanger after cliffhanger at you. Every chapter is slowly adding one more question to the whole equation. And before you realize it, you've become completely invested. Now, let's talk about the blue light because what was that? I absolutely love that the author doesn't immediately tell us. It appears, it moves, it almost behaves intentionally, and then it disappears. What fascinated me wasn't even the light itself, it was everyone's reaction to those lights. Some people are immediately thinking, ghost, while others are thinking it's a natural phenomenon. Frank, of course, being Frank, basically says, let's go towards it. Frank is that one child in every horror movie. You know, the one where everyone else says, maybe we should go home, and Frank says, let's investigate the glowing thing in the swamp. Honestly, if I were one of his friends, I'd have been like, I support your scientific curiosity, but from the safety of my bedroom. One thing I'm really appreciating in this book, though, is the group dynamic. Everyone reacts differently. Some are frightened, some are skeptical, some are curious. It actually feels like children, real children. Nobody suddenly becomes action hero, and Beth, I'm liking her more and more. She's sensible without becoming boring. She's brave without becoming reckless. And that's a difficult balance to write. And then the book gave us its first genuinely chilling moment. The children follow the place where they last saw the blue light, and instead of finding magical explanation, they discover a dead man lying face down in the marsh. I actually loved this scene. Not just because of the dead body, obviously, but because the novel suddenly shifts genres here. Up until now, it felt like folklore. But now it's also becoming a mystery. And can we just appreciate Frank here? Instead of doing what every fictional character does, touching everything, or moving the body, or destroying every piece of evidence, Frank actually says, don't touch anything. We need the authorities here right now. I genuinely laughed because apparently this 12-year-old has better crime scene awareness than half the detectives in television dramas. I can't wait to read further. Let's dive right back in. I've officially reached that point where the book has completely changed shape. Do you know those novels where you think you've figured out what genre you're reading, and then somewhere around the halfway mark, very slowly say, actually, no. That is exactly what's happening here. When I started this, I genuinely thought I might be reading a marshland ghost story. Now I don't even know anymore. This feels like folklore, psychology, memory, a coming of age novel, and now even a little philosophical. Basically, David Morabito has decided that labels are optional. We've left childhood behind, so one of my favorite things about this section is the time jump. We leave behind the adventurous children running around the marshes, and suddenly we are dealing with adults who've spent years carrying the emotional baggage of everything that happened. And honestly, I always love this trope because childhood mysteries don't just disappear. They become obsessions. You don't stop wondering, you just get older while the questions stay exactly the same. Now, let's talk about Frank as an adult. I really like adult Frank. He's still recognizably the same person. He's still curious, he's still analytical, still completely incapable of leaving a mystery alone. I mean, at some point, you have to ask yourself, Frank, have you considered therapy instead of another expedition into haunted marshes? But I also think that he has changed. Childhood Frank explored because it was exciting, but adult Frank investigates because he needs answers. There's a sadness to him now that wasn't there before. And when it comes to Beth, she is also becoming a much richer character. I actually appreciate that the novel doesn't suddenly turn into a romance. Yes, there's clearly affection between them. There's history, there's this relationship, there's regret, there's awareness. But the mystery always remains the center of the story. And I really appreciate that. One thing that's fascinating is how the marshes almost refuse to age. People change, relationships change, decades pass, but the fens still feel exactly the same. They are still mysterious, they are still silent, and they're still waiting. It almost feels like the landscape has a memory of its own, which I think is a very deep concept. And then things become much stranger. Without giving away too much, Frank's encounter in the fens leaves him in hospital, and what follows is not only about the physical recovery. The novel starts asking whether what happened can be explained in ordinary terms. This is where I literally put the book down for a minute because what is happening? I kept asking myself, is this trauma? Is this supernatural? Is this memory? Or is the book intentionally refusing to answer? And I kind of admired that. Oh, can we please talk about Raymond Mann? Mann. I have no idea how the name is pronounced, but I'm gonna call it Mann. Raymond Mann. What an entrance. I genuinely cannot figure this man out. Every time I think I've understood him, he says something or does something that makes me completely rethink everything. He has this really strange energy. He's calm, confident, almost as though he understands something the rest of the characters don't. And that is always dangerous in fiction. Whenever one character knows more than everyone else, I am immediately suspicious. Over the entire course of reading this book, I've had so many theories, but now they've all changed. I no longer think the story is simply asking, is the Lantern Man real? I think it's almost asking something much bigger. How are legends born? Why do people keep believing stories generation after generation? And can folklore sometimes preserve the truths that science hasn't explained yet? That to me is a much more interesting question. I also keep coming back to the lantern itself because every time it appears, it feels exceptionally deliberate. It's not just lighting the darkness, it's almost representing Frank's refusal to stop searching. And maybe that's what the novel is actually about. Not ghosts, not monsters, but curiosity. The human need to keep asking questions, even when the answers might hurt. The atmosphere is getting better. I honestly think the atmosphere is becoming stronger rather than weaker. Usually, mystery novels lose some of their magic once they start explaining things. But here, I actually feel more unsettled than I did at the beginning. Because now there are emotional stakes as well. The marshes don't just feel creepy anymore, they feel tragic. I also want to give credit to the pacing. This book absolutely refuses to rush. And I know that's going to divide readers. Some people think, can we please move things along? But actually, like slow mysteries, when they are well written, it feels like wandering through fog. You only ever see a few meters ahead. My only tiny criticism so far is that occasionally I wish the dialogue sounded a little more natural. There are moments where characters explain things in quite a formal way. It fits the old fashioned style that I was talking about at the starting of this video, but every now and then I found myself thinking people don't actually talk like this anymore. It's not a big issue, just something I've noticed. I do think Raymond Mann knows far more than he's admitting, possibly everything. I think the mystery of the Murphy family is going to become just as important as the mystery of the Lantern Man itself. Their disappearance keeps lingering in the background, and the novel clearly wants us to connect those threads. And I still don't think the blue light is evil. I'm sticking with that prediction for now. If anything, I think humans are probably going to end up being the more dangerous part of the story. Let's see. So I'm absolutely invested now. This is honestly turning out to be those books which I'm quite literally sitting in 4 to 5 sittings. I'm desperate to find out who or what Raymond Mann really is, whether the blue light has a rational explanation, and how all these pieces are eventually going to fit together. I've only got now the final last stretch left, and judging by the direction this is heading, I don't think it's going to be a quiet ending. I did it. I finished The Lantern Man. And I don't think this book ended in the way I expected at all. Not because there are massive Hollywood style twists, but because it stayed true to itself right until the last page. It never suddenly became an action thriller. It never abandoned its atmosphere. It remained exactly what it promised to be, a quiet mystery wrapped in folklore. And honestly, I respect that. When Frank and Raymond head back to the fence together, I was ridiculously excited because this entire novel has basically been building towards this one journey. And I have to say, author David Morabito has absolutely nailed the atmosphere here. The darkness, the reeds, the mud, the silence. Even though I was reading this in broad daylight, while it's still raining outside, my brain was convinced I should probably switch on another light. And I also appreciated something that I don't think enough mystery novels do. Here, nobody suddenly becomes fearless. Frank is still nervous, uncertain, and trying to understand what's happening, which makes him feel real. And we again talk about Raymond Mann because this man remained an enigma until almost the very end. I genuinely loved that. Every time I thought, okay, now I understand him, the book would immediately remind me, no, you really don't. He's one of those characters who almost feels larger than life. Not exactly because he's flashy, but because he seems completely unbothered by things that would terrify anyone. And when he finally confronts the blue orb, I genuinely wasn't sure what was going to happen. That scene. Let's talk about the confrontation. Without spoiling every tiny detail, because I still want you to read the book, this scene is honestly one of the strongest moments in the novel. Instead of running away, Ray actually runs towards the blue orb. I mean, who does that? Normal people absolutely do not chase unexplained glowing entities through marshes. And what's fascinating is that the orb actually appears to retreat while Ray relentlessly pursues it, leading to a confrontation hidden among the reeds before a huge explosion lights up the sky. At this point, I literally sat there thinking, I have absolutely no idea where this is going. And then, boom, literally, the explosion completely caught me off guard. Because suddenly, this low, quiet, atmospheric novel gives us this incredibly dramatic visual moment. There are flames, light, chaos, and then Raymond Man is simply gone. And I actually love that the novel doesn't immediately hand you an explanation. Everyone starts speculating. It could be methane, it could be the blue orb, it could be something supernatural. Nobody actually knows. And the biggest question, what actually was the blue orb? And I love that even by the end, the novel doesn't force one single interpretation. Was it supernatural, a natural phenomenon, something psychological, something symbolic, something humanity simply doesn't understand yet? Honestly, you need to read the series in order to get the bigger picture. Because when we first met Frank, he was simply a curious little boy. But by the end, he feels like someone who spent his entire life trying to understand one impossible moment. And that impossible moment was a part of a big cosmos that the author has built. Sometimes one unexplained event changes the direction of your entire life. That's exactly what this book means to convey. I also felt surprisingly emotional about Beth. Without getting into spoiler territory, I think the relationship between Frank and Beth is much sadder than I expected. It's not very dramatic, it's just very real. Because life always doesn't give people perfect timing, and I think this novel understands that. One thing, though, that I wasn't expecting was how reflective the ending became. Instead of trying to answer every mystery, Frank is left contemplating questions that may never have definitive answers about Raymond Man, the Blue Orb, and even the long unsolved Murphy family disappearance. I really like this book because not every mystery needs every single answer tied up with a bow. After closing the book, I kept thinking about something. This story isn't actually asking, does the Lantern Man exist? It's actually asking, why do legends survive? Why do certain places collect stories? And why do people continue believing them generation after generation? That's a much bigger conversation. I think my favorite aspect throughout the novel has been the atmosphere. The marshes almost become another character. The blue light never stops feeling mysterious, and the pacing never betrays the mood the author is trying to create. Although I will say, if you are someone who likes incredibly fast pacing, this probably isn't your book. Because this novel asks you to slow down, to observe, to think, to absorb the setting, to observe. It's much more interested in mood than constant action. So, did I enjoy it? Yes, absolutely. But more importantly, I enjoyed thinking about it. And for me, that's sometimes even more valuable. So that's it. I have officially finished The Lantern Man. I deliberately avoided turning this into a full review because I want to sit down separately and really talk about what worked, what didn't, who I think will enjoy this book, and whether I'd recommend it. But as a reading experience, I'm genuinely glad I picked it up. If you've read the book, let me know what you made of the ending. But please use spoiler warnings in the comments because I'd love for people discovering this book through these vlogs to enjoy the mystery for themselves. Thank you so much for coming along on this reading journey with me. Next up will be my full spoiler-free review, where we'll dive into the writing, the themes, the characters, and whether The Lantern Man deserves a place on your bookshelf. Until then, happy reading!